Hi, I'm Greg. I'm the lead singer for Lipstick.
I'm Steve. I'm the bassist.
And
Rock with the faces.
and welcome to the Lipstick panel. Today on the Lipstick panel, once again, I force Steve to consume media that I enjoy. As listeners in the past have noticed, like, Greg, you just make Steve watch or listen to things that you like. Yep.
We were supposed to be starting to record an album here, and Greg was like, "Hold on, though. We need to watch about 8 feature-length films first."
Yeah, we're a band. We're about to record a brand new Lipstick album, actually produce new content, and then I saw Creed 2 was coming out. Like, yo, dude, put a halt on our album.
Yo, Adrian.
There are more important things than creating original art. We need to marathon all the Rocky movies immediately because I want to go see Creed 2 in theaters, and I will go by myself, but if you want to go with me, you can. It's like, all right. But I'll only do it if I can watch all the Rocky movies with you, Greg. I'm like, okay, well, we're just not going to record our new album. We have to do this. This is more important.
There's a lot of important context I feel like I would have missed if I hadn't watched, the other 7.
So before we get too much on rambling, let's introduce our special guest. We've got Lee McCormack from Tramps Like Us, an excellent Bruce Springsteen podcast, joining us to talk about these anthemic, blue-collar, working-man films where we successfully punch communism. Lee, welcome to the show.
Yeah, that's right. How's it going, Eddie? Thanks for having me, guys. Great to talk about Rocky Balboa and these 8 great films, man.
Yeah, I will say this is the hardest ranking I've had to do on any of our episodes, because typically we rank songs and albums on this show.
Yeah.
Occasionally, we've done a couple movie commentaries, and we did rank all the Rick and Morty episodes, but for the most part, we're a music-based podcast because it's way easier to just listen to a CD once than to, marathon an 8-film series.
Yeah, you're talking like 18 hours worth of content here, right? Over 8 films or something, too.
Yep.
But
the Lord of the Rings Extended Editions episode is going to be a rough one.
Oof. But Steve was like, you know what, dude? We've watched all 8 of these. We might as well do an episode. I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's a good idea. It's timely. So typically the way we start our episodes, we go around our panel and we talk about our history with the subject at hand. So in this case, it'd be the Rocky franchise and the Rocky films. Lee, since we just met at the recommendation of our favorite Sado, Craig Smith, I'd like to hear your story of the Rocky films and just your history with the franchise.
Well, it's a long story. It goes right back to my childhood. The very first movie, when Rocky, the original, came out in 1976, I was too young. I was born in 74, so I would have been about 2 years old when that came out. But I vividly remember about being 4 or 5 years old, and that was when you could rent like Laserdisc players, before even renting like VHS videotapes and stuff like that. You could rent Laserdiscs, which were these big 12-inch discs, right? And they had movies on it. So I remember like a family thing where we rented a Laserdisc player, and we rented I think it was probably a 79 because we got both Rocky and Rocky 2 on these Laserdiscs. And I vividly remember seeing those movies as a young kid and just being just been taken with the character and the emotion and the way that those films were written, and just getting all caught up in it and almost thinking he was a real life guy, And then, in Rocky 3 I saw in the theater, Rocky 4 I saw in the theater, a little bit older in my childhood. And, it's just hooked, a big, huge Rocky fan. And, just followed the series all the way through, even Rocky 5. And then that long, I guess, almost 16 years until Rocky 6 would come out, right? Which kind of would really put a better button on the series than Rocky 5 then. But, Rocky's still just a big hero of mine, even as an older middle-aged man. He's still my hero,
Yeah, I would say I think Rocky is a great hero of American cinema, and I'm a huge fan also. I'll go next. I was introduced to the Rocky movies through my dad. My dad has made a lot of really terrible mistakes in his relationship with me and in terms of parenting. But I'm going to give him credit. That was one of the things he got right, was sitting down and watching the Rocky movies with me, where we just, over the course of a weekend, rented the first 5 because that was all that was out at, the time when I was growing up in the 90s. And we watched them all together, and I became a really big fan. And then I revisited them in high school, and I loved them even more because I just understood what they were about better. I appreciated the writing, the craft, and like became a really huge fan. And at that stage in my life when I was in high school, most of the stuff I liked, like I'm a 70s and 80s rock guy. And so all the stuff that I liked was not being made anymore, and it was very frustrating. Because, I'm a big Kiss fan, and at that time, the last Kiss album was in 98, and it was like, 10 years before they released the next one. And so it just I was really hungry for new content from these older artists, be it, Stallone with the Rocky films or Kiss with music. And so when Rocky Balboa came out in high school in 2006, I was 16, that was a big deal for me because I remembered, watching the production of it online and waiting in anticipation for it to come out and really hoping it was going to get made. And reading the press releases where it's like, oh, it's not being made anymore. Okay, now it's being made, and the back and forth, and just really rooting for it just to exist. Yeah. And then when it came out, it was just this big triumphant thing for me. I went on, it came out on Peter Criss's birthday, which is a holiday I celebrate called Peter Christmas, where I wear Peter Criss makeup, listen to jazz music, and eat lots of pasta. So I went to Rocky Balboa opening day in Peter Criss makeup, to fully celebrate being Italian. But,
really good times.
been a fan of the franchise for years. Love it. And I think it's probably my favorite film franchise of all time in terms of each movie being consistently good.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think they're good in different ways. So to say Rocky 3 is as good as Rocky 1 in the same ways is incorrect. Rocky 3 does certain things better than Rocky 1 does, and vice versa. And ultimately, we'll debate which is the better movie of the two. But I would say each film is good in its own way, and they do a really good job of building off each other. And I think it's great. And Steve, it's your turn.
So, I think my first exposure to the Rocky franchise was when I was a kid. So I was born in 85. When I was a kid, at some point we had an issue of Mad Magazine kicking around that parodied the plot of Rocky IV. So I was actually very intimately aware of the plot of Rocky IV before even getting into this. And otherwise, I didn't watch any of these. I was 5 when Rocky 5 came out, and so I didn't particularly care. And then when Balboa came out, I was hanging out with my college friends who are their film tastes were best summarized as, I had the one roommate that the second time that he went downstairs on a Saturday morning, turned on the TV, saw, oh, they're doing a Leprechaun marathon, I guess my day's settled. The second time he did that was when he decided, well, let me just go ahead and buy the box set so I can do this whenever I want and not have to watch commercials while doing that. So I didn't watch any Rockies until about 2 weeks ago when this Greg said that he wanted to go watch Creed 2, and I was like, all right, I guess so. And then we watched the whole series.
We went the distance.
We watched 4 of them last Sunday.
Yeah.
Wow.
We were gonna record. We were gonna record a podcast episode, but family meant that one of our guests had to drop, so we were like, all right, we'll delay that episode and then just watch more Rockies.
Yeah, we're like, we could record stuff for the new album. I'm like, nah, dude. If we watch all 4 of these, then we'll be ready for Creed 2 on Thursday. And so we're like, all right, let's go the distance.
Excellent. Well, so we got 3 different kind of backgrounds on these movies, right? Steve, you just saw them. Greg, you've sort of been in the middle, and I've seen them for 40 years here now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Steve and I did just watch them in preparation for Creed 2, so they're both very fresh on both of our minds.
Oh, I did too. Believe me, and that's the thing. Anytime I watch one Rocky movie, I gotta watch them all. I can't just watch Rocky 3. If I want to watch Rocky 3, I gotta watch all 8 now. It's a thing.
So if they keep on coming out with these things, this is just going to become an increasing time sink for you. Exactly. I kind of want to watch a Rocky movie. Oh shoot, I have to watch 12 Rocky movies.
Yeah, you got to make it like a 2 or 3 week thing, schedule.
Endeavor.
Yeah.
A pilgrimage.
Yeah. But I've been watching them. I watched the series about twice a year religiously, probably for the last 20, 30 years for sure.
Dang.
Yeah, there are certain films in the franchise. I'm a little bit different where I can watch certain films over and over again in isolation, and watching the entire series in a row I don't do super often. I think it's just mainly because I just keep myself stupidly busy all the time, and I'm at a point in my life where if I am actively watching a single TV show, I'm like, whoa, I'm actually watching TV? No way, this is weird.
Y'all caught up on Gintama?
Gintama's done again, dude.
Ah.
Right now I'm watching Polar Bear Cafe with Amanda. And yeah, it's tremendous. And also there's a Rocky reference in that show, and that was a very pleasant surprise as I'm watching the Rocky movies, and then the panda bear has a training arc, and he's saying, "Yo, Adrian." I'm like, it makes me feel good that Rocky transcends, the continents. But yeah, I mean, so Steve, general thoughts on the franchise overall before we get into it, because obviously Lee and I are both big fans, but how do you feel about the series as a whole?
So when I was younger, I sort of offhand tended to dismiss Sylvester Stallone because, I grew up in the post Die Hard era of action film where you had to be a little bit smarter about things. You couldn't just put a giant meaty dude on screen and call it good. And so I just sort of lumped Stallone into that giant, meaty Schwarzenegger-esque, Reb Brown-esque dude era of filmmaking, and mostly ignored his work. And it wasn't until I saw the intensely prophetic Demolition Man and the just kind of good Death Race 2000 that I realized he was actually a good actor. But I still haven't actively sought out his films. But I went into these being like, are these actually good? And then I did enjoy this series overall. I thought, like, yeah, these are, Stallone is good at what he does. He just kind of hid it for some time behind, Cobra and the latter Rambo films.
Check out Copland if you want to see some good Stallone acting. Yeah, that's kind of Stallone at his most kind of Springsteen-esque too.
Nice. I keep on catching your outs. Are you from Canada?
Yeah, I'm from Toronto.
Nice. Alberta myself.
Cool.
I'm the lone Yankee on this panel.
Americans.
That is not what I expected when talking about the Rocky movies to be the one American.
The one Italian American talking about Rocky with a bunch of Canucks.
Right. But yeah, I'm glad you gave it a shot. I mean, and also the thing that I think is great about Stallone is that he's also a writer. And, the fact that he wrote these amazing, well-developed characters, where, characters like Paulie and Apollo and Drago, like all these characters that he wrote and added these layers and depth to and really made a complete world. Like, I give him a lot of credit as not just, a macho meathead guy. There's layers and depth to his work, and I think he's a very talented individual.
For sure, and the emotion he writes in the characters, like all the characters in the film are like likable in their own way, and they're all got these kind of, different layers of emotion that they all emote through the series. Like even the villains kind of got all great backstories too.
Well, so let's get right into this ranking. We'll go film by film and discuss. So for first-time listeners of the program, the way this works. We typically rank albums on the show, songs on albums. But since we're doing films, 8-film franchise, each panelist votes on the films in order from best to least best, because I don't think there's a bad film in this series. And so the best Rocky film by a panelist would get 8 points, least best would get 1 point, and then we add up the votes of the panelists. In the event of a tie, whichever in the tie gets more hate. So like, let's say someone ranked something as their last place film, and then the other film, while tied point wise, didn't get a last place vote. That one would win out in the tie. And if the numbers in the tie are the exact same numerically, as happens today, it is decided by coin toss or traditionally guitar pick toss. And the
boxing glove toss.
And so we do have a tie at the bottom of the ranking, and the coin flip was done twice, and the result came out the same both times. So this one is the last place in our ranking, just to make sure there was no cheating or shenanigans. So the last place in our ranking of the Rocky films is Creed 1.
Wow.
Yep.
So,
all right.
Now the thing is that doesn't mean just because it ranks last in the ranking doesn't mean it's not good. This was the hardest ranking I've had to do because I love all of these so much, and each of these films does something great that the other films don't do. And so it's really hard because there's different things to value and appreciate about each of these movies. And I think Creed 1, is a film that no one saw coming, no one thought was going to be as good as it was. Like, the original poster that I saw for Creed 1 was back when it was first announced, and it was like some really bad fan-made image and just made the movie look awful. It was like really bad Photoshop of like Carl Weathers in the background. It looked terrible. I'm like, oh no, this is going to ruin the Rocky franchise. Why would they make another one after Balboa? It was so good. Apollo Creed's son, that sounds like such a lame gimmick. But then I looked like, oh, it's Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan. Fruitvale Station was amazing. This movie's going to be really good. And it was really good.
Really good, yeah.
I mean, Michael B. Jordan is, I think, an actor who has the potential to be like another Stallone, where he could have just a huge career over a long period of time and be a Hollywood icon. Like, he has, obviously the physicality, like, the dude is jacked. But he has the emotional prowess to his acting where, in Black Panther, he stole the show. Like, he was by far the best part of that movie. And you kind of rooted for Killmonger to win. Like, yeah, Killmonger's right. Kill all the white people. Like, yeah, I mean, as a white person, I'd be dead. But like, I'd get killed by Michael B. Jordan. It's okay. But, I mean, just a phenomenal performance. You got his relationship with Tessa Thompson is great. You got the mom from The Cosby Show, Felicia Rashad, doing great.
Yeah, she's good.
Rocky as a wacky old man, like he really, he fits into that character so well. Like, he is the same age as an actor when he did Creed 1 that Burgess Meredith was as Mickey in Rocky 1. And so it's very poetic to see him move into that role. And the thing is, when you look at the franchise as a whole, it is fascinating because you get to see like the life of a person, but like spread out, across over 30 years.
Well, that's the thing, seeing Stallone play this character who's like, with the latest Creed movie, he's been playing this character for 42 years now. So he just has it dialed in perfectly, right? Like, so he can turn it on and turn it off and kind of manipulate the audience and tell the story with like all these kind of things. Like, he knows the character better than anybody. And it was cool to see, Rocky as a 60-year-old in Rocky Balboa. And now to see him 10 years later, as like a 70-year-old, like as a legitimate old man, like dealing with old man ailments and, fighting cancer and stuff like that. It was just an amazing performance, right? Academy Award nominated performast, which he was robbed of.
And, absolutely deserved. And also to give Stallone even more credit. Like, that was the year of, hashtag Oscars So White. And he actually used it as a platform when they were asking him about his nomination, if he was happy with it. And he said, I'm honestly mixed because this film is the result of, two incredible young black men, and they're the ones who should be recognized, not me. And so, the Academy needs to be more diverse and needs to evolve or become extinct. And to use his nomination for like, something that socially progressive and to take a stand like that and to support, those fellow filmmakers and acknowledging that they brought that new blood into the series, because this was the only film that Stallone didn't have a writing credit on. And so that was a super classy move from him, and just like all around, just, just a great film, great energy behind it. Like, Ryan Coogler, you can tell he made this movie because he loved it. Like me, he watched the Rocky films with his dad and just loved the franchise so much and had this vision for a great film. And, he's one of the best, directors out there today. And like, man, they knocked it out of the park on this one. Even though it's last on the ranking, it is such a phenomenal film. And I think succeeds better than The Force Awakens does with Star Wars, where there are some beats that reflect the original Rocky.
Yeah,
and
the montages and stuff like that are there, right?
Yeah, it mirrors it, and losing at the end and a split decision and all that. Like there are some beats that match, but I think that it feels like a more organic story than The Force Awakens does, and I think this is just an A+ film, and like there's no shame in ranking at the bottom of this list because all these films are great.
Yeah.
Steve, how about you? What are your thoughts on Creed?
So of the three of us, I rank this one the highest at third place. And so I'm not coming at this with the nostalgia of having watched these films as kids, which I think probably colors things a lot. In that, just this was fascinating to see Rocky done with really good modern production values. Like I think the Creed movies have really good soundtracks. For one thing. Like the original Rocky soundtrack, Gonna Fly Now and Eye of the Tiger are great songs. They made for good scores. The Creed movies just have like a cool modern soundtrack that really gets your attention. And I found myself listening to that and was like, oh, this is really legitimately good music going on here. I thought the fight choreography was really good in this one. There's been a lot of Rocky points for the fight choreography in this series, but yeah, this is the one which had that one like whole unbroken round of boxing.
The entire fight, it wasn't even just the round. That entire fight was one unbroken shot.
Oh yeah,
yeah, following from the dressing room over Rocky's shoulders, like right out to the last bell. Right? Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, and I guess plot wise, there was it's I think not the most significant plot in the series. There were better, more interesting stories told at a couple points, but not many of them. I think this is one of the better stories. And at some point, as long as we're talking about people's descendants becoming boxers like themselves, we have to use this drop.
Your dad is a Dracula.
But yeah, I enjoyed Creed a lot.
I think this one was really good at establishing a new generation of characters you sincerely care about, and this was a very personal story because it was about him accepting his legacy with his father but building his own.
Yep.
And so this was a lot less about the flash and bombast on the outside, and one of the better personal pieces in the franchise.
But the flash and bombast on the outside are probably the best they've ever been.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think the unbroken fight, I think that's a great in terms of bombast, and I think all of the fights have been generally good. Like the final fight with Ricky Conlon, who I thought was a good, realistic antagonist. In the sense that, like, yes, a modern athlete going to jail for waving around assault weapons is kind of a realistic thing we would see from, like, a UFC fighter or something. So I appreciated him as a antagonist, and, like, the motivations of all the characters made a lot of sense in this movie. And, as far as the soundtrack goes, we'll get into the other films when we get into them, but I think the hip-hop score worked really well in this film and the latter Creed film. Like, I don't think I think these movies all have fantastic soundtracks.
Yeah.
Like, I love Bill Conti's score. I love the Vince DiCola score. I love the stuff in this film. Like, everything works.
Yeah, what's his name? Ludwig Göransson or something?
Yes.
He did the score for Creed, yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if I have more to say about this one, unless you guys have anything in particular you want to bring up.
I love that. I'm not spoiling anything, but when he pops,
spoilers for the. If you haven't seen the Rocky movies, we're gonna dig into spoilers. So,
spoiler when he actually gets knocked out for real in the last the end of the last fight there with Pretty Ricky Conlon, right? Like if you can look on YouTube and you can see him get knocked out for real when they make this one shot, and as he's lying there on the canvas, he's like flashing back through his whole life, and he's seeing like his mom, he's seeing Rocky and stuff like that, and then he sees a last image of his dad, right, and then he just pops up like a ghost possessed, right? Like I thought that was awesome.
No, that was awesome. That's a chills moment.
Yeah,
and you just, it's hard to even put into words how great that moment is, but that is one of the best moments in the entire franchise, and this is a franchise full of great moments.
And I roll a tear in almost every Rocky movie, right? And this has got that scene where where Rocky's like, I'm going to stop this fight. I'm going to stop this fight. And Creed's like, no, don't do it. And Rocky's like, why? And he goes, I gotta know that I'm not a mistake or something like that. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm just going to start crying. And then Rocky's like, all right, we'll go out there and knock this son of a bitch down. Can you do it? Oh, so good.
And you know what I love about him, Rocky saying son of a bitch, is that I know he just really wants to be Mick. He doesn't really say that. Yeah, son of a bitch. That's what Mick would say, right?
That's right. Yeah, totally, man.
Oh yeah, this was the one with all the sort of 300-esque camera speed up, slow down tricks.
Yes.
Although I think they did it very well, and that it wasn't 300 where it's the thing all the time, but they used speeding up and slowing down to try to really emphasize the impact of the hits.
Yeah,
I thought that was a really cool effect, that like every punch in the boxing matches got sped up right at the last second, so it looked super huge, as if 250-pound dudes who have been working out for their entire lives are actually putting all their weight behind a punch.
Yeah. So phenomenal film. No shame in ranking last on this list. Like this is still everything's S rank. Like nothing is even A rank. These are all S rank films for me.
All these films are high recommends.
All right, so next up on the list, we have Rocky 3.
Rocky 3, that's quite low. 7th, eh? Wow.
So this is probably largely my fault. So ironically, I just spent all that time praising Creed for its great production values and all that other stuff. I feel like of the original run, Rocky 3 is the one with the best production. It's got the the better choreographed fights. Rocky actually uses some technique other than block with your face and somehow win or at least survive until the end of the fight. I think this is probably one of this had some of the best production in terms of fight and visuals. But overall, I don't think it was that useful. It feels like a placeholder plot to me. Like Rocky ends the second film sort of at the top of his game, and they just sort of continue to have him on that upward trajectory into this film, and there's nowhere for him to go. There isn't really that interesting of a story to tell with Rocky, heavyweight champion of the world, walking around dressed in suits, driving nice cars all the time. That just the whole thing, like, all right, so he got cocky and he lost a fight, and then he goes back and he wins the same fight. Also, he fought Hulk Hogan for a while. Cool.
Well, this is the change, right? This is the change in the character, where the first two movies he's developing, it's this character build up to become the champ. And now the third movie, he is the champ, and he's rich and he's married and he's got everything where he wants it, and he's a complete success, but he's lost this kind of drive and hunger, and he has to kind of relearn and gain the eye of the tiger kind of thing, and he's dealing with Mickey dies in this one, which is a big loss for him, and he has to kind of find his roots. And
oh yeah, I forgot how many times they said "Eye of the Tiger" in this one.
Yeah, so
Apollo's just like, have I said "Eye of the Tiger" in the last 30 seconds? Let me do that again, quick.
So Steve and I have talked about with grunge bands, the quote of Gene Simmons or Paul saying, grunge bands have a great first album because they're angry and hungry and poor, and then they have trouble writing a second album because all of a sudden they have money and most of their problems are gone. And I feel like this was definitely the hardest one to write, because how do you make Rocky a sympathetic and interesting character where he's on top? He has money, he has success, he's doing well. What kind of struggle could someone in that position have? And so from a writing standpoint, it is fascinating how there's still like an interesting narrative, in that position of the character. But I think, the movie has a lot of really great things about it. I think, examining a character in that position isn't something often done in fiction, and for good reason, because that's like extremely tough to make that compelling. But it is fascinating to see how well it's done in this movie. I think actually seeing Rocky become a good fighter, because realistically,
right.
he was a bad fighter in the first two movies, and he didn't actually have really good boxing technique. And so
it's a lot of heart, a lot of soul,
Yeah, it's all heart and soul. It's like, it's like a really good punk band where it's, they've got the energy, but they're just not good at playing their instruments. versus Rocky actually learned how to play his instrument.
Well, that's the trick. Is a really good punk band, when they learn to play their instruments, the magic is gone.
That's it's a fair point, but I think there are so many great things about this film. I think the Rocky and Mickey stuff, I think, is really dramatic and really well done. I think those scenes hold up with the stuff from the first two films easily.
Oh my God, that scene where Mickey dies in the back after he's losing the fight and Rocky starts bawling. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, that's...
And Rocky cages it so it sounds like he won.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, the fight's over, and he's like, yeah, knockout in the second, and Mickey's like, yeah, good. He didn't tell him that he got knocked out, right?
Yeah.
But that's a powerful scene. I think, and there's so many great things. Like, I like the statue being introduced, like, just on I enjoy seeing the friendship between Rocky and Apollo develop. Like, those scenes are all really great. And, that fight at the end where we wondered for years who won the fight, and then Creed eventually answered it. But that was like something that fans would discuss for years, like, who won that third fight?
Yeah,
even though
I love that last moment where they just freeze frame on the first punch, right? Like Apollo's throwing the right, Rocky's throwing the left.
Yeah, and you're just like, who won? And if you think about it, it was definitely Apollo, because Apollo wants the fight way more than Rocky. And if Rocky isn't going his absolute all, like, I need to win this fight to survive, yes, Apollo would win. So, but yes, the fight with Hulk Hogan is a great part of the series.
So good, yeah.
Like it's fun. Like, it's a very fun film. The fights with Mr. T are fun, and I like how it isn't. This is one of the few films where it's not going the distance. It's a knockout in two, and I think he beats Clubber Lang in the final fight in like the third or fourth round or something.
Yeah, both the fights are short. Yeah,
and so that's different because it's more like a realistic boxing match, because most don't go 10 or 15 rounds, and so that was a clever twist on the formula. Seeing him become a refined fighter and actually like use proper technique and become a real champion was great.
It's cool to see him go to LA with Apollo to like the kind of grungy LA gym.
Yeah, and him working with Tony for the first time, and Tony, what a great character in the series. Like, they add a lot of depth to the characters. Like, the scene with Paulie at the beginning, all that stuff I thought was really good. Like, there's
when he throws the bottle on the pinball machine.
Yeah. And, let's, introducing the world to Mr. T, like bringing him to the masses, that's a credit to America there.
Yeah.
If they had just had the closing credits song be Treat Your Mother Right, like Greg promised me, I probably would have liked this one a lot better.
But the closing credits song was Eye of the Tiger again. And come on, this Eye of the Tiger is
brilliant song.
And is a brilliant, perfect song.
Yeah, but it's no Treat Your Mother Right.
Come on, dude. You
be somebody, Greg, or be somebody's fool.
But you and I were you were the one who brought up to me the other day what a great song Eye of the Tiger was. Unprompted.
Eye of the Tiger is a brilliant song.
I saw this was the first Rocky movie I saw in the theaters. My dad took me to this when it came out in 1982, and that song was huge. And I remember we left the theater after seeing the movie, and I was just ecstatic. And that song came on the radio as we were driving home.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I remember that for sure.
And as a big shonen anime guy, like, this film set up a lot of the things that shonen anime would later follow, like all about, being strong, working with your past rivals and training with them, and then having like a really catchy pop rock song as the theme song to like, sell the show and the song.
See, you bring up shonen anime, and I feel like the more charitable way that I would describe this film in its overall place is like, it's not bad, but charitably I would call it a training arc. Less charitably, I'd call it a filler arc.
I would say this is a training arc, because this is like, hey, Rocky, here's how to learn to actually be a good fighter. Like, that's important, because like Apollo taught him like proper technique, like, how to have more nuance to his fighting style, as opposed to being just like, I'm just a big dude and I can take a punch.
Yeah. Yep.
Although at the end, the way he wins the fight, though, is he just keeps taking punches from Clubber Lang, and he just says, come on, you ain't so bad, and he's just leaving his guard down, and Clubber's just teeing off on him. And Rocky's just got a hard head. He's just he's just not feeling it, and then he just makes a comeback. But so I don't know what kind of strategy that is. But.
Well, I think I've heard it described that Rocky's general strategy is take a beating until your opponent is tired, and I think that was sort of explicitly stated in this one, is that Clubber Lang was not used to not having knocked his opponent out within 2 rounds, and so by the time it started to get into the 3rd round, he'd just run out of power. He'd run out of steam. So Rocky, who was used to just taking a beating for 15 rounds, was able to say, "All right, now it's time to rally and finish the fight."
And I do like the stuff where Rocky's training like a chump for the first fight, and he's in that nice like hotel, and he's got girls and bands playing, and Mickey's just getting all mad. He's like, "Come on, can we go? Let's go back to the old gym. Come on!" And girls are asking him for kisses and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, and it's the series, full of great montages, but that's a great montage, like the contrasting styles of the way Rocky is training versus the way Clubber Lang is training.
Yeah,
and you're
he's
just
in a basement.
And you're just like, oh, Clubber's going to destroy him.
Yeah, he's doing those chin-ups, like in some dirty basement.
Yeah.
You're like, this guy's a monster.
And also, seeing, but they do introduce new elements into that training montage where, like, Rocky running with the bike behind him, like, held on to him, and Mickey being on the bike, which they did in Punch-Out, the video game, years later. And Steve's like, oh, I thought Punch-Out made that up, and they just stole it from Rocky 3. But also, this was the first time we got to see Rocky in the red, white, and blue shorts. And
yeah, that's cool.
And those shorts became like such a huge part of the franchise. Like, think of all the characters, the really important characters who have worn those. Like, that was a big deal. And that was the first time we saw Rocky wearing them. And that was super cool.
Yeah. Apollo passing the torch, so to speak,
Yeah, so
passing the shorts.
Passing the shorts,
yeah.
So for me, this is another great film. I will admit, it didn't hold up as well when I watched it most recently with Steve. The way I always remember the Rocky movies was that 4 was the odd one out.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe part of it due to like the score changing, where it was Bill Conti for all the other films, and then all of a sudden Vince DiCola's synth keyboard-driven score. But 3 and 4 are much more closely linked than I remember them being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're both very much glossy Rocky. Whereas the first 2 are like really have that low budget 70s grit about them.
Yeah. Movies of the 80s, or the very 80s, the 3 Rocky movies there in the 80s.
And like in the context of the overall series, like when I was a kid, 5 was the last one. And so 5 kind of felt like an oddball. And the way you thought of the Rocky series was 3 and 4. It's just like these big heroic action movies. And now that we're at Creed, and now that there's 8, 3 and 4 are the oddballs because they're the big heroic action movies in the midst of these like really serious dramas.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, those ones stand out now.
But I still a great film, still S rank, and I still love it because there's so many great things this film does. The scenes with Mickey are legitimately great. The fights are great. The Clubber Lang fights and the Hulk Hogan fight, like all those are great. Yep. And the bromance between Rocky and Apollo frolicking on the surf together.
Yeah.
Like that's what I dreamed to one day do with Steve.
Those muscular thighs running down the beach, man.
I don't work out enough.
We can still hug each other on the beach, frolic in the surf. So any other comments on Rocky 3 before we move on?
I love it. I got a lot of nostalgic tie to that one, so that's a great one for me. I love it.
I would say out of all the films, this is the one that benefits most from nostalgia, I think. So, like Steve watching it, no nostalgia attached, ranking it last, I totally get that.
If I were to watch the whole series again, I would just maybe, if I were to edit this series, I would extend the Rocky 4 previously on Rocky scene a little bit to get the high points, a couple more high points from Rocky 3, and then just cut out that one probably.
Yeah, I think 3 is probably the one that's most fun to watch, like, on TV, if it's on in the background. Like, I think 4, straight through, watch that on DVD all the time and love it. But 3, if it just, I think that's the one where it's like, yeah, nice little commercial break, eat a snack, go back to it. Oh, sweet, he's fighting Hulk Hogan now. This is awesome.
Yeah. The set piece fights in that one, yeah, like the Hulk Hogan fight. That is not tied to anything. It's a neat fight. It's kind of fun, and Hulk Hogan, does a good job of like playing his character of way too serious when in character, and then just totally cool when out of character. He does a good job of that. But yeah, that fight, adds nothing to the Rocky meta.
I mean, look, Rocky beat WrestleMania 1.
Right, but that's the meta, the actual Rocky meta plot that's not involved in.
Well, when that came out, that was my first introduction to Hulk Hogan. Like, wrestling wasn't mainstream when that movie came out, and Rocky 3 was a big, push for wrestling and Hulk Hogan when that came out. He was a household name after that movie for sure.
Yeah, most people did not know Hulk Hogan before Rocky 3, so really Hulk Hogan and Mr. T were brought to the masses through this movie.
So Rocky 3 is responsible for my great enjoyment of Suburban Commando as a child.
Yes.
There you go.
And Mr. Nanny.
I didn't actually watch that one.
No, it's about the same quality.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I mean,
Right.
another great film. Speaking of great films, this next film on the list is also great. We've got Rocky 2 next on the list.
Right. Rocky 2.
I think
Now, that's an underrated one. I think that one gets dogged a lot, but that's just the other half of the Rocky story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this one, I think it mainly comes down to the fact that he's fighting the same opponent at the end is probably why it gets glossed over. And being completely honest, the first fight with Apollo is better than the second fight with Apollo. There's way more tension in that fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why this film gets ragged down a little bit. But I think, honestly, this is, a fantastic film. And if what you're looking for is like the strong character writing like you were in the original Rocky, this is one of the best films in the series. I think there's so many brilliant things about this film. I love the intro sequence where you got the two ambulances going to the hospital at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think the score in that section is brilliant. Like, I listen to that piece musically on its own all the time. I think that's fantastic.
That's Redemption, that song is called. Bill Conti's score.
Yeah, no,
Redemption.
it's so great. And what's also great about this is that, like, it's a very accurate depiction of what happens when poor people get money.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, they blow it right away and don't manage it very well. Like, that is like, it is so true to life, this film, where, like, when poor people I know, myself included, who all of a sudden when they get like a big payday for something, they buy some stuff, and they don't manage it very well or save it very well. And just like, this is the one where you really feel like economics on a truthful level, where like, he's trying to earn an honest living. He doesn't want to go back to working on the docks and being a enforcer, a collector. And so he's trying to, earn an honest living, but the job is brutal. It's difficult. He's not making enough money to survive and support his wife. Like, this is the one where, like, I could see as a Bruce Springsteen fan being like, yes, I resonate with this. Because this is
Absolutely, yeah.
It's the gritty blue collar one, and you really feel it. And so this movie, when I saw it as a kid and I hadn't really like struggled as much economically, I still liked it. But, rewatching it after like years of like, clawing my way out of poverty and like, recognizing that difficult struggle, like this one, if you're a blue collar working class American trying to earn an honest living, like, damn, is this a fantastic film.
Yeah.
And this one, that whole idea really echoes increasingly towards the end of this series. And once you start getting into Rocky Balboa and the Creed movies, that, Apollo Creed was like, he was a great boxer and he was also a shrewd businessman and good promoter. So you get to the Creed series and his illegitimate son is able to be adopted and raised by his widow with no financial issues. That kid essentially grows up rich because, Creed is
the money they made, yeah.
fundamentally doesn't live like a poor person, whereas Rocky fundamentally does live like a poor person. And, towards the end of the series, he's got a restaurant that's barely scraping by kind of thing.
The one scene that always gets me in Rocky 2 is where, Rocky's, I think he just got laid off from his job there, and he's realizing that he's having a hard time making it, and he wants to go back to fighting. So he goes to see Mick at the gym there at night, and they have that conversation in the hallway. and because I guess Rocky's having a hard time seeing out of one of his eyes, so Mickey does this like slap test or whatever.
Yeah.
And he just rocks Rocky because he can't see out of his right eye or whatever there, and Rocky just gets this look like he's just helpless. And then he just asks if he can work at the gym because he just needs to be around it, right? So then the next part of the film, you see Rocky just kind of cleaning up at the gym and carrying spit buckets and stuff like that. And, it's just heartbreaking, Meanwhile, Apollo Creed's dogging him in the press, right? Because he wants a rematch, and Creed can't just face the fact that he didn't beat this unknown guy, right?
Yeah, and I think this movie, really develops, like, Apollo gets really great development across these films, where there's been criticism about the Rocky villains not being very well developed, but like when you look at the whole series, like, like Apollo, is a very well developed character, and this film really adds more layers to him and makes him more compelling than he was in the first, and he was already compelling in the first film.
Yeah. The very first scene where they're in the hospital and like they're wheeling their wheelchairs in, and then Apollo's like, "Where is he? Where is he?" And they're in the reporters, and they just started. He challenges them to this like rematch, like in their wheelchairs.
And I think
so great,
and it makes sense because I know Steve and I were talking about this. We're at the end of the first film, Apollo saying, "Ain't going to be no rematch."
Yeah, that
was before it was a split decision. And then when he thought about it, I was like, you know what? No, I need to beat this chump right now. I've got my pride. I've got my ego. Like, that is completely within his character. Like, everything works. Even Skinny Paulie works in this movie.
Paulie lost a lot of weight, man.
And also, I will say, probably the funniest line in the entire series is the line about condominiums right after Rocky's wedding.
I never use them.
Yeah, probably the biggest laugh out loud moment of the entire franchise. And I think this is the best movie in terms of Mickey scenes, because you get a lot more Mickey in this movie than you did in Rocky 1.
I like how you lapsed into Mickey voice for that. You got a lot more Mickey in this one.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of his line, you're gonna eat lightning and you're gonna crap thunder. Like, just so many great lines from Burgess Meredith as Mickey in these films, and just, phenomenal. Just like his little speech about speed, you gotta get speed. That's the ticket, speed. Like, it's so great. It is absolutely phenomenal. And
because of the injury to Rocky's eye, he's training him right-handed, right? Like, that's the strategy. Rocky's a southpaw, but he's going to change. He's going to train him to fight right-handed to protect that eye.
It's really brilliant. I love the film, and that final fight. Yes, not as good as the first fight between Rocky and Creed, but still a phenomenal final fight. And yes, a little bit cheesy where it's like they both fall down at the same time. But you know what? Yeah. When you're actually sitting down watching it, you get lost in the moment, and it does build that tension.
So great.
And admittedly, this series, like, they have the protagonist lose quite a bit. So at any time, like, they can lose the final fight. That is a very real threat in this series. It's not guaranteed like, oh yeah, they're definitely going to win.
Which is sort of ironic, because that's probably, like, from what I gather of real boxing, one of the least realistic aspects of things. Because the heavyweight champion of the world these days is almost always just undefeated until they're defeated, and then the guy who beat them is the heavyweight champion now.
Yeah.
But just in terms of, like, who to expect to win in these films, I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. You don't often see heavyweight champions parading around and be like, yes, I've gone 22-15. Heavyweight champion of the world.
Another great training montage in this one too. This one's it's got the setup, I guess, where Rocky's training like a chump again, and but this time it's because Adrian's she's went into a coma, right, giving birth to their son.
Yep.
And then there's the powerful scene where Rocky's in the church there, and Mickey comes to talk to him, and he's just like, I don't know what you're doing, man. Like, you're gonna lose this fight. The champ wants to kill you. He goes, and then he finally says, but you know what? If you want to lose this fight, I'm going to lose it with you. And he just kind of sits down with them.
Man, right? What a beautiful moment.
Yeah. And then Adrian finally comes out of the coma, and she's like, there's one thing I want you to do. And Rocky's like, what? She's like, win. And it's like, oh, man. Right. And there it is. And then it cuts to the training montage, right? Rocky doing one-arm push-ups. So good.
And, the kids running behind him and him, speeding past them.
Yeah, so good, yeah.
But,
the professional athlete running faster than children.
Right. But also, I'm really glad you brought up the birth of Rocky's son, because these films do such a good job on building on things brought in from past movies and, not forgetting about them and making them important, where, Rocky's son becomes a really prominent character in his own right. And, that character goes back as far as Rocky 2. And, to see that character, grow up from being a baby and then becoming a grown man over the course of the films. That is the passage of time in this series is done, aside from
somewhat organically, because all the actors are aging.
Right. But it's really the writing makes it really fascinating as a piece to watch, because, there's not really film series that do that kind of thing. So it makes it really interesting from that perspective.
Rocky 2 probably has, one of the most iconic Rocky lines of it too, with the ending where he's just I just want to say this is besides my kids being born, this is one of the greatest days of my life. Yo, Adrian, I did it. Oh, so great, right? With lifting the belt in the air and he's crying, and then he gives Mickey a hug, and then it just freeze frame and the credits roll, right?
Yeah, and especially the era this came out in, because 70s films overall were much more nihilistic, cynical, depressing, and here comes just this ray of optimism where yes, times are tough, but you can still triumph. It was,
you too can have a successful career of being punched in the face,
right?
Yeah.
But I think at the time these films came out, they were a breath of fresh air and what the public was yearning for and wanted, and that's probably why they became such sensations.
He's an American hero. Yeah.
Yep. And hey, that's coming from a Canadian, so that's got to be legit.
It is, absolutely.
All right. Any other comments on Rocky 2 before we move on?
Yeah,
that's a good one.
I've ranked this, towards the mid bottom, because it's crucial to the Rocky story. Him finishing his rise to the top needs to happen at some point. Yeah. I feel like it's not the most compelling part of his story, but it's something that needs to happen. So,
well, it's kind of like when you're watching a documentary on bands and they, spend a lot of time in the early days where they're struggling, but what you really care about is the story behind their albums when they were successful.
Right.
That's kind of what this is still he's still struggling in clubs, but can you just get to the albums? I want to hear about Dark Side of the Moon.
He's still struggling in Club Berlangs. Wait, no, that was the other one.
All right, so next up on the list, we're halfway there with Rocky 5.
Rocky 5.
All right, so Steve, you ranked this the highest. Why don't you go first?
Oh, I did rank this the highest. Okay. So I thought this one did a really good job of changing things up from the formula. By the time you got to Rocky 3, there was some definite patterns emerging, and this one was the one that really started to break away from those patterns and say, all right, things are functioning differently. I did like the the way it started off with the previously on Rocky 4, and then straight into the aftermath of that fight with all the health side effects and whatnot. And I think this was, this had some really cool twists from the way things normally went. I like the way it ended with, instead of a proper boxing match, he just gets into a street fight with his protege and learn.
My ring's outside.
Yeah, realizes that, family and loyalty to the people who are loyal to you is more important than anything else. We were talking about villains tend not to get well developed, is the argument some people have with the series. Ironically, this is the one where women actually start to get some development. I think that's been one of the series' strongest, or one of the series' great weaknesses, is that it's about the dudes who are punching, and they all have the one, maybe two women who are in their corner, and they barely get any development. But I feel like Adrian really starts to come into her own as a character in this one. Like Rocky V is when Adrian is really an interesting character who has her own thoughts other than just, oh, be resistant to Rocky fighting because it's dangerous, and then right at the start of Act 3, change your mind and now be super supportive of him fighting because he's the hero.
I think Adrian was an interesting character in the first Rocky and the fifth Rocky.
Yeah, 1 and 5.
And then 2, 3, and 4, she really wasn't that compelling of a character. I'll definitely agree with that.
She wasn't very interesting in Balboa either, let's be honest.
Well, I'll actually disagree with that, but...
I know, I disagree too, but it makes a good joke. It's funny because she's dead.
Actually,
that is kind of tragic that she's a little more compelling in Rocky Balboa as a dead character than in Rocky 2.
So
as a live character.
So I'll go ahead and wrap my thoughts around Rocky 5 real quick, and then we'll let Lee go. So what I love about this film is that, yeah, it did defy a lot of expectations, because that beginning where, you know, you hear those war drums and you see Sylvester Stallone on the screen, and that's at the time at the peak of Stallone as huge action star, where you're just like, this is going to be the most epic Rocky yet, because you got those war drums and you got the intro recapping the end of 4.
Last time he beat communism.
And, you know, you've got that great Bill Conti score over that sequence, and it's one of the best sequences in the series is that recap. And, you know, it's really great that this film is about the consequences of the final battle. Because realistically, Rocky 4 is the final battle of the series. And then everything else is the aftermath of that final battle.
It's kind of his last fight with Drago, right?
Right. Like that's like and it's probably in the context of this universe, probably the most epic fight that universe has ever seen.
Exactly.
The best 2 boxers that universe have ever seen at their absolute peaks, destroying each other's lives with that fight.
And ending the Cold War.
And ending the Cold War. Like, you know, we'll get more to 4 when we get to it. I don't want to talk about too much until we get to the film. But that, like, you know, this is the aftermath of that epic battle. And, you know, to see Rocky, like, being forced into going, like, back to his roots where, you know, he loses his money and has to go back to the old neighborhood because he can't afford anything else. I think there's something poetic about that, especially like...
Broke Rocky is a much more compelling character.
It's not even just that, but there's like a certain like poetry to life where, you know, there's an expression that, you know, you can leave the hood, but the hood never leaves you. And, you know, coming from Cleveland and stuff, and like, you know, a little bit of like, you know, rougher neighborhoods back when I lived in like, you know, the juggalo-ridden parts of town. Like...
Wait, I see where this is going.
But like... Yeah, you do see where this is going. But like, you know, there's a part of you that wants to escape your past and finally get to a good place in life. But sometimes like your past just drags you back, whether you like it or not. And you're just forced to confront it. And it is not an appealing part of life. It is a terrible part of life. And you just got to stare it straight in the eye, and it can beat you down. And that's kind of what happens in this movie. And that's actually, I think, a really clever thing that it did. And, you know, I think Tommy Gunn, I think he's a great character. I think Duke is a great character as a villain. So, you know, he's kind of like the Don King of that universe. And so seeing like the corruption that he brings in, I think is really fascinating. I think Sage Stallone does a great job in the film. And I think, you know, when my dad watched it with me, you know, he told me he originally didn't like Rocky V at all. But then after having a son, he said he resonated with the movie a lot more. And so that father-son dynamic is really well done in the film. I think the soundtrack, while incredibly dated, is still very good. And that final fight scene between Rocky and Tommy, I think it's a cool change of pace. And it is nice to know that, like, in this universe, like, there's probably some snarky sports commentators like, hey, remember that one time that Rocky Balboa beat up Tommy Gunn, like the reigning heavyweight champ, and he just, like, beat the shit out of him in a back alley? And, like, you know, some like some sports commentator will, like, talk about, like, the greatest boxing matches of all time. There is some ass was like, yeah, the Rocky Balboa Tommy Gunn fight. Like, that's not a real match. Like, hey, he won.
I know. Can you imagine that 2 heavyweight champs having a street fight? The news that would make.
Right, and then just like everyone definitively seeing Rocky winning that fight.
Yeah.
like would make him even more of a legend.
Yeah, and punching out the promoter at the end.
Yeah, and also the fact that he didn't immediately get like an endorsement deal after that is unrealistic. Because guarantee everyone would have been like, hey, let's do commercials now.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, this one would probably be my least favorite, of the 8 films. And a lot of that was because for the longest time, for 16 years, this was the last Rocky film. This was the button on the series, and it just didn't sit well with a lot of Rocky fans, Stallone included. And a couple things in this movie always bug me. The fact that Paulie signs over power of attorney and Rocky loses everything because of this. How is that possible that your brother-in-law can just sign a paper and you can lose your entire fortune? That was kind of always weak to me.
Well, no, Rocky signed it.
Yeah, he gave it to Rocky to sign. So Paulie looked it over and said, yeah, this seems legit. Here, Rocky, sign this.
This was when I started to appreciate Paulie. Paulie is aggressively terrible this entire series, and by Rocky 5, it finally clicks. Be like, hold on, Paulie being awful is great. I love it.
But even still, even if it was some lawyer that manipulated that, I don't buy that. They have to lose that much money, and then the whole Tommy Gunn thing was, I don't know. It just seemed like Rocky just turned his back on his son so quick for this Tommy Gunn kid, and that stuff bothered me. It was almost like Rocky was acting a little punchy in this movie, he was kind of a little silly, right?
Almost as if he had brain damage.
Yeah, from getting
almost as if that was explicitly
stated from Drago. So the way he's interacting with his son and stuff like that was just weird, and I don't know, it didn't rub me the word. When he handed Tommy Gunn his red, white, and blue trunks and stuff like that,
I think it made sense because I think what Rocky really wanted was, a protege. I think he really wanted that and wanted Tommy to be the Rocky to his Mick. That's what he wanted. And I think he wanted it too much and was putting his own impressions on Tommy rather than what Tommy actually was. Yeah. And so, and that's kind of a realistic thing where, there have been times where I've been really psyched about a new band member and really, trying to shower them with praise and support and thinking they're really a team member and thinking that there's something that they're not. And then when their true colors come out, realizing I was putting my own impressions upon them rather than just realizing what they were, which is, someone with a half-hearted interest in it or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I get that side of it, and I think it's very real. And, the scenes, I think, I actually buy the progression of his appreciation of Tommy. You watch those scenes where it's Tommy, Robert, and Rocky together. It makes sense because, he's, trying to talk to both of them and tell both of them stories. But, oh, wait, Robert, wait, I just want to tell Tommy this. To me, I buy all of that. The economic downfall is the hardest thing to buy. Yeah. And I think that's maybe why a lot of people, didn't like the movie because, Rocky was rich and successful, and to see their hero fall, go back into poverty, and no longer be able to fight.
I feel like they explained it well in the film, though.
No, they explained it well, but I'm saying I can see why Rocky fans wouldn't like that, to see their hero just get destroyed.
Yeah. I do like that scene in the attic, though, where Rocky puts on the leather jacket and the hat, and Adrian gets the glasses back. Oh, that was pretty cool.
Rocky in leather jacket and hat is so much better than you suit Rocky.
Yeah. And I always had a problem, because it's just part of the series now. It's just chapter 5 in this, 8-chapter series now. I can just take it as just part of the story. But when it was that final film for 15 years, it just didn't sit right.
I could see that, yeah.
Yeah, when that was
very unsatisfying.
Yeah, that was the ending. And when I first came into the series, that was the last film. And while it
ends with a fucking Elton John song too, right? Come on.
Whoa, that song is great, first of all. But when I think about masculine macho dudes, my immediately thought is Elton John. But that was the last film in the series, and I really wanted something, I think all of us want something a little bit more triumphant from Rocky. And so there was a hunger from fans. And, that's why I was so, watching closely the development history of Rocky Balboa, because I so wanted that movie to exist, because I felt like this, I think it is a good ending. I do think it is, but it's not the ending that I wanted. And
I love the ghost scene with Mickey, the flashback in the ring.
Oh yeah, those were great. And I will say the work cut, if you've seen that, where Mickey's dialogue is so much better in the work cut of the final fight with him versus Tommy.
I haven't seen that. I gotta find that. I've heard about that. I gotta see that.
Yeah, like the final version is a lot more generic, but he gives like just this really great speech and, you know, uses son of a bitch way more. But it's much more true to Mickey. But you know, I think it's a fantastic film, and yeah, the My Rings Outside line, that's classic action movie Stallone. Like I adore this film. I still think it's great. I think it gets a lot of unnecessary hatred. I will say that ranking it at the bottom, I legitimately see in comparison to the rest of the movies, where I think that is fair to rank it at the bottom.
Especially if it was your unsatisfying ending for a decade and a half.
Yeah, right.
Or even if you just marathon them all, like, you know, Steve and I did, and you hadn't seen any of them, I could still see why someone would rank this at the bottom. I totally get that, but I still think it's an S-rank movie. I still think it's brilliant. I still love it.
All right.
Any other comments on Rocky 5 before we move on?
I'm good. Rocky 5.
All right, so next up on the list, we have Creed 2.
Creed 2.
Yep. This one hits a lot of the same high points that Creed 1 did, I think. It's the production values on this one weren't quite as good, especially watching it on the big screen. Victor Drago looks like he's CG in a lot of shots. He looks like he was cribbed from a boxing video game, which just threw me for a loop. But there was a lot of really good moments in this. I really liked how it resolved the Ivan Drago's story arc. Like the way that fight ended, I thought was the way that fight ended in the denouement with Ivan and Victor, I thought was very good. And that, like, you know, basically Ivan Drago spends this entire film being the Dragos spend this entire film being these angry pariahs who are attempting to reclaim their place in society. And then at the very end of it, you know, without even using words, Ivan Drago is such a good character. Without even using words, he says, you know what? What's not important? It's not important that we win this battle and regain our place in society. What's important is that we are family. So he throws in the towel, and then he goes jogging with his son.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, that was so brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, and such a, you know, brilliant reversal from, you know, what happened in Rocky 4, where Rocky made the mistake of not throwing in the towel, and then Apollo dies. And to have Drago recognize that, and that growth as a character where he's like, I don't want that to happen to my son, who, you know, he's been harsh on his entire life and forcing him to become this monster almost in the same way his nation forced him to become that monster. Like, brilliant writing.
Even Victor too, who looks over and while he's like down on the mat, and the count's going down on him, and he sees that his mother is left, and he's just like, I can't fight anymore, but I'm not going to get knocked out. So he stands up, and he's like, he just keeps taking the punches because he that's all he can do, right? And his dad throws in the towel. Oh, it's heavy. Yeah,
this is such a brilliant film. I would say, you know, when we're talking about great moments in the series, you know, and this is fresh after seeing it, but I can say this without hesitation. One of the best moments in this entire series is Rocky and Drago's conversation in the restaurant.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Like, that is
goosebumps. When you just see Drago sitting there and you just see the back of him, and Rocky slowly walks around and he's like, is that you?
But each line of dialogue has you on the edge of your seat, because those two have never really talked before, but just there are little things like Drago saying there's no pictures of our fight in here. And like, you know, Rocky like acknowledging that, I'm like, yeah, I don't want any, because that's not a fight he's proud of. That was just like a fight he felt he needed to do.
Yeah. And
just like felt that within his soul, like he had to avenge Apollo. And so like
so really he defeated communism by accident. He wasn't even proud of that.
Yeah, and that's actually, I'll get into that a little bit more once we get into Rocky 4, but I think that's actually sort of a brilliant part of it, is that Rocky didn't want a part in this war. He was sort of a reluctant hero. But like that scene between Rocky and Drago in the restaurant, just, brilliant writing, some of the best dialogue in the series. And, the tension really builds up when, Victor comes in later and, suddenly Rocky's outnumbered in his restaurant.
It almost gets a little scary. Like, are these guys going to throw? Or like, what's going on?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, you totally think like a throwdown might happen right there, but
Rocky's like, I think we're done here. Is that what he says? Like, I think we're done here.
Yes, it's so brilliant. But I would say this film does a better job about making me care about the characters from the previous Creed, where I care more about Adonis. I care more about Bianca. Like, I really care about those characters a lot more in this film. Like, I've become more invested in them at this point. The tension is high, and there's, so many great moments. Like, when you see the Dragos coming to America and seeing, them looking at the Rocky statue and the steps and seeing how beloved Rocky is and how they're on Rocky's home turf. But they coming for revenge, like, absolutely brilliant. But focusing like the character stuff with like Adonis and Bianca, like their relationship really develops so well in this movie, where you really are rooting for them as a young couple to succeed. And I will admit the stuff with the newborn being deaf wasn't executed as well.
They played that up as such a big deal, like our child might be deaf. But like, yeah, that's an inconvenience. But hey, good news. Both of her parents already speak sign language. She's going to have a super easy time for a deaf kid.
Yeah, but
it's also just showing that Adonis is still not really matured into the kind of man that he should be, like even how he's like, the one thing with this movie is I didn't really get his motivation for taking that fight. Like he should have just listened to Rocky and his mom. Like, why do you want this fight? Like, it's got nothing, you and your father's got nothing to do with you, right?
But it's sort of proof that he has that ego and that he is a flawed character, and he's a different protagonist than Rocky. Yeah. He's young, he's cocky, he has a lot of his father in him, where he, does have, the ego and pride and has to prove how cool he is. And that's makes him a different character than Rocky. And I think it made him less appealing in Creed 1 as a character, where but I think it worked better in Creed 2 for me, just the writing of his character, where he just became more endearing, because it is hard to write like a cocky, egotistical lead and be on their side.
Yeah, he's a Creed too, right?
Yeah, he absolutely is. But I would say, so many brilliant things, like the fact that the movie sort of opens with that championship bout, and that they didn't have an entire movie about him becoming the champion, and that they didn't need to.
Yeah, it was just a quick fight, right?
A quick fight, and like all the fights, like the writing is so clever in all the fights, where he loses the first fight, he wins the first fight on a technicality because Drago gets disqualified.
Yeah, that was written so great, right? Yeah. Like, so he technically got his ass kicked, but like
still won.
Yeah, he's still the champ, right?
And also one of the best training montages in the whole series, where they're out in the desert, like. And it's sort of like a poetic reversal of Rocky IV, where instead of training in the snow, training in the desert. Like, it does mirror Rocky IV in a lot of ways. And, Rocky IV gets a lot of flack for being kind of silly, over the top, and you can't take it seriously. This is taking Rocky IV brutally seriously, and it completely works 100%.
I like the stuff with the tire where they're fighting, just throwing body shots toe to toe, and they both got their foot in the tire. So cool. Where he's throwing punches on that flaming barrel, throwing his punches in between the flames. That was wicked.
Yeah, and once again, great soundtrack. I thought the rap music worked even better in this film than it did in the first.
Well, I feel like a lot of what's happening with the soundtrack on this one especially is they looked at what's very trendy in music right now, and they applied proper production to it. Like that was very much like SoundCloud trappy mumblecore rap, but they really put a budget behind it to make it really good.
Yeah, and it's not the kind of music I normally listen to. I typically don't like it, but it worked so well in the film, where I believe that was 100% the right artistic choice.
Yep.
Yeah. Another good score by Ludwig too. He's back, and perfect use of the old Bill Conti score too. Like when he would Gonna Fly Now would show up, or in the training montage and stuff like that during the fight.
Yeah, so I mean, this another brilliant addition, and the resolution this offers for all the characters at the end. with Adonis and Bianca at the grave, with Amara, their newborn, Rocky, visiting his estranged son. And I liked the whole, like, I was just in the neighborhood.
That's what he would say. That's
the neighborhood
what he would say,
being British Columbia,
Yeah, this movie's really a story about father-sons, right? And it ends with those three sets of father-sons, Victor and Ivan running, Rocky and Robert reconnecting, and Adonis visiting Apollo at his grave for the first time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful, brilliant film, and I personally think it's better than Creed 1. Now, part of it might just be the shonen in me, where just like, this is the more epic fight, therefore more awesome.
Punch him through a mountain.
Yeah, so maybe that's part of it, and my love of Rocky 4, leaking into my love of this one, but
it's cool to see all the old characters come back. Even Bridget Nielsen, the way she comes back was a surprise,
Yeah, and honestly, there was a part of me that was tempted to rank this even higher, but I might have, artificially deflated it because I didn't want to have too much new movie hype from it. But had we done this list maybe like a year later, I mean, this could have been like my number 2. Like,
it's hard to say. Some repeat viewings, and we'll see how it holds up,
But I will say, absolutely, like, as soon as I, left the theater, I wanted to see it again.
Yeah.
So this is, a very satisfying addition to the series. I really hope they keep going and making more of these. And I'm sure, like, they've consistently found ways to be clever and shake things up. And so while I can't think of what they would do next, I'm sure someone would have the idea and it'd be great.
Yeah. Now Sly has said that, like, he's not going to do the character anymore. Like, he's done, but I think he's wrong. We need him back, man. We need him back for Creed 3.
But I would say even if Rocky wasn't in Creed 3, I would want to see Creed 3 because I'm interested enough in the new characters at this point.
Absolutely.
Where if like we just never see Stallone in another one of these movies, I am fine with that. I would like him to still be in it, but if he's not a presence,
he'll have to at least make a cameo.
Even if it's not, or even if they just mention, like, oh, Rocky's in Canada and doing well, if they just mention him off screen, like, I'm fine with that, because what's more important is like the message of like heart and determination. And as long as that flame keeps burning, like, yes, Rocky is that loving character, but as long as the films still have the heart that they do, that is what's ultimately more important than one individual.
They better not kill him, though, man. I don't want Rocky to die. Rocky's just going to
here's the trick.
There.
if they're going to keep making Rocky films, eventually Rocky has to die.
They just don't mention it, man. You just don't have to mention it. Just don't mention it.
It's probably going to be an off-screen thing.
Well, that's the thing. Just don't say it, man. Just don't
tell us about it.
Yeah, Rocky's out there. We'll just
he's at a nice farm upstate where he can run and be free.
Yeah.
But yeah, any other comments on Creed 2?
I have a handful of stray observations.
Yeah, go for it.
I did like that. So with Bianca talking to Apollo's mom, what's her name, Marianne?
Marianne.
Yeah. So the fact that the two of them have an extended conversation about Adonis is the closest this series comes to passing the Bechdel test. So that's not necessarily a great look for the Rocky series in terms of well-written female characters again. But, it's fun.
But I would say Bianca and, Adonis' mother are well-written.
It's true.
Like, they're very good characters. Like, the series has stepped up its game quite a bit in writing female characters.
It's true. They're important characters, but they're still important supporting characters to the man's plot line.
But also, like, it's a movie about, like, dudes punching each other.
It's true.
So it's how important, can you write those characters?
All I'm saying is Creed 3 had better, Ronda Rousey had better be the bad guy. That would actually be pretty great. I would love to see that. The other interesting thing that I'm fascinated. So Greg and I are musicians. That's our main hobby that we do. And so as a musician, watching Bianca's career as a musician is always sort of fascinating.
Oh, yeah, where she's like, she has a residency in huge crowds every night, and then all of a sudden, is playing the bigger venues in Philly, and then like, oh, she moved to LA and got a record deal in a couple months.
Well, in Creed 2, her career is much more plausible than in Creed 1, because yeah, in Creed 1's like, oh yeah, sure, she's totally doing a sold out residency every week. That absolutely people are going to that. No, that's not particularly plausible. But in Creed 2, it's like, yeah, she's married to a super famous dude. She walks into she walks into any record label and be like, look, I have an extensive history of creating music. I have some amount of fan base already. Oh, also, I'm married to somebody super famous. I'm eminently marketable. Any A&R rep's going to look at that and be like, yes, we can sell this. Here is a contract that I had in a drawer handy for you. I also do really love her musical number before the Moscow fight, when she's just walking out there and singing and the crowd is booing.
That was pretty badass.
As a musician, like, oh man, that is probably the biggest crowd she has ever played for, and it sounds like they hate her. What is she feeling right now?
That was pretty whack, but he is a Creed, like.
Yeah.
Well, they should have been cheering for Rocky.
I also do like how their relationship, Bianca and Creed's relationship, is much more millennial. Where in the first one, like, you know, as soon as Adrian gets pregnant, you know, they're both super excited. Rocky's like, yeah, we're having a kid, and this is the best thing ever. And then, you know, Bianca gets pregnant, and the two of them are just like, oh, frig. Oh, this was not what we were planning on. All right, I guess we got to roll with it. I liked that. We're not ready for this. Well, let's get ready line. That was a good line.
Yeah, their relationship was a really big plus in this movie. Like the scenes with the two of them together were just phenomenal. And a lot of people were saying that this director, whose name I'm blanking on right now, but from Cleveland, so shout out to my hometown boy,
like Steve Cable Jr. something. Yes. Like that? Is that it?
Yeah, a lot of people are saying, he's not as good of a director as Ryan Coogler. I think both them brought unique touches. Both of them did a great job. And that this guy, I think, has a lot of heart. And, like this would have been such an easy movie to mess up. Like, think about it. Like, yeah, so this time he fights Drago's kid, and it's like Rocky 4 again. Like, this could have been so easy to make
Rocky
terrible.
4 2.
But the fact that it's as good as it is a testament to what a great director this guy is.
One big change I would have made with this film, I think, if I were in charge of it, is what's his name, Buddy Marcel, the evil promoter. I would have made him the same guy as the one from 5.
You would have just brought back Duke?
Yeah, no, because I think, if you're talking about, like, the villains are underdeveloped in Rocky, just have this sort of economic nemesis to Rocky running throughout the series, I think is be a more interesting way to do it. Instead of two underdeveloped characters that are in one movie and then immediately tossed out, make it just like this one guy who isn't necessarily, evil or against Rocky. It's just this, manipulative person who's out to make money and doesn't care who has to get hurt to do it.
I get that, but also it's a possibility of, like, the actor potentially not being able to do it.
It's possible.
Plus, that Duke character is pretty over the top. Like, it's almost pretty comic booky. It's very... it's exactly Don. He's
just Don King. And Don King is just not a relevant pop culture force anymore. Exactly. So he would probably look silly by today's standards.
Acting like that, yeah. I like the introduction of Rocky in this film, the way, Adonis is getting ready for the fight, and you just hear Rocky start giving him the pet talk off screen, and he slowly comes into focus, right, as the camera pans out.
And there's a lot of good shots. And there's another dude in the background crossing himself. That's the
Is that Stitch? Is that Stitch? Is that the cut
it's
guy?
Stitch. And so, but yeah, it's a really good fake out. Like, man, really clever cinematography in this movie. It just all around, like,
there's a scene where Rocky goes to visit Adonis after his beat up the first fight, where Rocky wasn't in his corner, and they have words, and Rocky leaves, and there's a shot of Rocky leaving, and they show his face in the mirror, like above the hallway, and you see his like the sad look on his face, and then you see him walk into the frame, and he gives a look back like he wants to go back and kind of go back and try and make up, and he decides to just leave. It's just good little things like that I love,
Oh yeah, it's another S-rank film, like another brilliant film in the franchise. I don't have any real complaints about it, other than maybe like the death thing. Yeah, it could have been handled a little bit better, but once again, like, brilliant film.
And another good Adonis Creed pop up from a knockout where he's everybody's just saying get up, and he starts like pounding his fists on the mat, and he just jumps up, and the ref's like, what's your name, and he just yells Creed.
Yep.
Cue the music,
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Any other comments on Creed 2 before we move on?
I can't wait to see it again. I might have to go see it for a third time in the theater before they pull it.
Yeah, no, I'm tempted to go again too.
Are you gonna have to watch all 7 first, or after you've watched all 7, can you watch one of them a couple times in a row?
Yeah, I can do that, I think.
Okay.
Probably. Yeah, it's all fresh.
All right, so next up on the list, one of the more divisive films in our ranking, and I think one of the more divisive in the franchise, actually, is Rocky Balboa.
All right, I love this one.
Yeah,
This is like, next to the first one, this is my second favorite one. I think this Rocky Balboa is the one that kind of thematically feels like the first movie,
Yeah, I think in terms of films that feel most like Rocky 1, you've got Rocky 2, the first Creed, and Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
And so they're intentional callbacks to the first film in a lot of ways. And I think Rocky Balboa is the one that benefits the most out of all these films, benefits the most from the time in which it came out. Because as you and I were discussing, being fans of the series and being left with Rocky 5 and really wanting more and wanting a better conclusion for the character.
Right.
Like, we were hungry for this movie.
Yeah.
We wanted this movie so bad. And, the fact that it was low budget, Stallone had trouble finding the funding because he thought Hollywood thought this movie was destined to fail. And it became this sleeper hit, which no one saw coming.
Yeah.
And, it became a huge success because it had the heart and the character, and man, the speeches in this movie.
Oh my God! Even I was skeptical too, because it was leaked that he's going to fight in this movie, and you're like, he's 60 years old, like, it's preposterous. How can this be, right? But it delivered. Like, he pulled it off. It was, you believed it.
Yeah, you absolutely did. And like I said, like, this movie is all heart and character, and it's. A lot of the Rocky movies are sort of meta commentaries on Stallone's life, where Rocky 1 was definitely a commentary on like how he felt that his dreams were passing him by and how, he just wanted a shot to prove himself. Rocky 3 was a statement on, what, the disconnect fame and fortune brings to you. And then, Rocky Balboa is when, you're old and washed up. Like, do you have anything left to live for? Like, when your best days are behind you, and, facing
dealing
old
with
age,
loss.
dealing with loss, and, people considering
loneliness. Yeah, loneliness.
People considering you to be a joke. Like, but the thing is, like, it's so brilliantly done. Like, the scene where he is crying over Adrian's death. Like,
where he visits Paulie in the butcher shop or the plant.
That I cried during. I cried when he's visiting the ruins of the ice rink where there was their first date, and now it's just a pile of rubble. And so those are just such great statements because as a society, things die, things move on. But like for those of us that are still like left, you go back to the old neighborhood, and it's different. And things that were important to the core of your being are dead and gone, just like the people that you love.
Yeah.
Like, that hits hard. And, let's talk about, by far the best scene in this movie, Rocky giving his son that speech.
Oh yeah, that's it, man.
Like that is the defining scene of this movie. It is brilliant.
The series possibly too. I might say that's the best Rocky dialogue in the entire series, I might say.
It's a classic moment of the series. When I was in high school drama club, I did that scene with my girlfriend at the time of drama class. Like I made her do that scene with me where I was Rocky and she was Rocky Jr. And
so cool.
I adored that scene. I adored the film. And it's interesting to see because Rocky and Paulie are sort of like mirror images of each other in a lot of ways. Where Rocky is how a positive person deals with adversity, and Paulie is how a negative person deals with it. Yeah. And so seeing Paulie lose everything too, and his reaction to it, it's the last film with Paulie in the series, but Burt Young does a great job in it.
Yeah, he's great.
Milo Ventimiglia, or however you say his name, he does a great job as Rocky's son, and you really believe that estranged relationship. I will say the film does falter a little bit with Mason Dixon as a villain, in that he is they tried to make him more compelling than past Rocky villains and make him more sympathetic, but he actually just came off, like, when you look at the grand series, he just comes off as less interesting because he's very subdued, and when you look at him as a fighter, like, Clubber Lang would have destroyed him, Apollo would have destroyed him, Rocky in his prime would have destroyed him, like, every other, he's like the weakest main antagonist Rocky ever had to fight, and he's only a challenge because Rocky is old.
I mean, that was sort of the whole idea there, wasn't it?
Yeah, but also I thought the computer fight was brilliant too, because it was a callback to the Marciano Ali computer fight.
Yeah,
like, there's just
a thing they really do. They really did those things.
They really did, and that's there's a lot of really cool stuff in this movie.
One of the greatest Rocky training montages too. I love old Rocky training montage.
Yeah, with
Duke
with
comes
the dog.
back. Yeah, and Duke gives that speech where he's like, your knees are bad, so you can't spar. You got calcium buildup, so you can't do this. And Paulie's like, yeah, I got that too.
Yeah. Oh no, that speech from Duke is amazing. That's one of the best bits.
We gotta make some hurting bombs. Yeah, so he's just gonna like build some powerful muscles and make him feel like he's kissing a freight train.
So what I'll say about this movie, though, and I when talking about this with Steve, where he wasn't as big on it as I was.
Yeah.
I think there's
the more I think about it, the more I've forgotten of this film already.
The two things I would say about this film is that the high highs are really good, and I will say that the time it came out was really important. But I will say it is a bit more of a mixed bag than a lot of the other ones in the series, where I can definitely see like the chinks in the armor in this one, and why Steve doesn't like it as much. But I think the sentimental value of like how important it was to me when it came out, how it was to the series when it came out, and those emotional, impactful scenes are why I rank it so high. But yeah, Mason Dixon is kind of an underwhelming villain. As I think the Little Marie stuff is good, but it's not as good as a lot of the other character stuff in the other films. So I can see why this one would rank lower on Steve's list. So Steve, tell me why you think this one's a pile of shit.
I mean, I rank this one second from the bottom. I think it's still like Rocky himself is still a good character, a better character than he is in 3. But not having the frustration of having gone a long period between 5 and this one, and not having that resolution, I feel like this one doesn't do a great job of resolving the things that were left hanging in 5, and it fumbles in a couple major important ways. So like it doesn't deal with what happened to that lawsuit that Rocky was probably a part of. What is Rocky doing for money after being broke? Did he like manage to recover some of his funds from the real estate scam, or what all happened there? Right as Adrian was starting to come into her own as a character and be a lot more interesting, they kill her off, and then replace her with another arbitrary love interest. I think that
I would disagree there. I don't think that's a love interest at all.
Yeah, I disagreed with Steve with that too. And what I would say is
they posed her as a love interest.
But they're definitely not replacing Adrian though. Like, Adrian's just as prominent as she is. She even brings a picture of Adrian to that final scene in the doorway, right?
And, the thing is, as a Rocky fan, like, when you come into this film, like, the big constant in all the films was how much Rocky just loved Adrian.
Yep.
And how much just love he gave to her. And so to see a film where Rocky didn't have Adrian, and to see him broken down, because that was always his thing, like, it was always Rocky and Adrian. They were a team. They loved each other. To see Rocky without Adrian and how miserable he was, being a fan for as long as we were, that was heartbreaking, because you always assumed Adrian was always in his corner.
I feel like that would have worked better without Marie, because like even if ultimately like she wasn't really a love interest, like the structure of the language of film caged her as a love interest. She was a a younger woman who Rocky was interacting with following the convenient removal of his previous paramour, and he even kisses her on the mouth towards the end. That wasn't a fraternal or paternal kind of kiss. That was a romantic kiss.
I disagree there, man.
Yeah,
it's like saying Steps is like he's trying to replace Robert as his son with Steps.
Oh, he is acting as a father figure with Steps.
I think he's just amassing a bunch of friends. I think he's just a lonely guy,
Which
Polly's moved out and everything. So I think his son's like doesn't want. He's just trying to make some friends here,
Yeah, and it's sort of like as you go through different stages of life, when you're on your own, you try to just find some people to be around you, so you're just not in total isolation. And so I think it's.
I don't think they framed it. I think in the language of film, she looks like a love interest. It looked like he was attempting to be a father figure to Steps.
I agree to a certain extent, where I think it's Rocky wanting to have a love interest, sort of wanting to move on in life, but being unable to because his grief is so strong. And so I think that's kind of the sort of the core is like, how do you move on past grief? How do you continue your life? And is there even any life to continue once you reach the age he's at? Is kind of what I think the film is questioning. Like, what do you do after you've lost so much? Is there more to life? And I think that's like kind of the questions they ask. And I think they leave it pretty open-ended in a lot of ways, where it's not like a satisfying, like, yeah, they're totally going to bone. And, it doesn't end up that way. Like, I view it as, I think they both want it to be a romantic relationship, but they just know it just isn't and won't be, and that's kind of the sadness of it.
I think even in that context, I don't think it's a strong element.
I don't think she looks at him that way, though. I think she looks at him as like a friend, like
she looks at him as the creepy old dude who told her not to be a whore when she was 9.
Yeah. I do love it. We should talk about the fight, the end of the fight, which is different than a lot of the other Rocky movie fights. Is this one kind of switches to almost like this TV HBO production style, which gives a lot of realism, I think, to the fight, the way it was filmed. And, the sound effects, they've lost those like big car door slamming punches, and they're getting like more realistic sound effects on the punching and stuff like that. And what was I going to say? Yeah, the fights were they were pretty much throwing real fists too for this. Stallone has said, right? Antonio Carver's a real boxer, and so he wasn't pulling most of his punches with Stallone. It looks really good, this film. I think the fight at the end of this.
Yeah, the number of times Stallone went to the hospital for the Rocky movies is pretty much like multiple times per film.
Yeah. And he looks good, man, for a 60-year-old guy. When he takes his robe off there, he's got the six-pack going,
Oh, yeah, and that was, part of the plot was that Rocky came to the fight in incredible shape, and Antonio Tarver's character, like, part of the thing was like, yeah, he didn't train for it at all. He was a little bit pudgy and didn't care. And so that's, like, they had to make it as realistic as possible. So the champ was out of shape, the Rocky was in sick shape, and then the champ hurt his hand during the fight. So that's the way they tried to make it realistic that Rocky would stand a chance.
Yeah. And a perfect ending, I think, to the Rocky series, in that like it's a split decision that he loses, but he doesn't care about the decision. He just walks out to the crowd cheering his name, and then it just ends at the gravesite with him putting a rose on Adrian's grave, saying, "Yo, Adrian, we did it," and then he just walks off and fades off into the distance.
I was a little weird that this is the first one that ends after the fight, right?
Rocky 5 ends after the fight. They're on the steps.
The steps, yeah.
I guess it's still within one scene of the fight, though, right?
Yes.
Wait, what is the very last shot of Rocky 5?
You remember they're at the art museum. It's like, I didn't know they had fancy paintings in here. The entire time I ran up these steps.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I forgot about that scene. I was thinking it ended with him punching out, what's his name?
Tommy.
Yeah. No, not Tommy. The promoter.
Oh, Duke. Not to be confused with the good Duke. Not to be confused with Tony Duke.
Tony Duke. Yeah, sue me for what? And then it freeze frames.
Right, that's how I thought it ended.
Yeah, but also I wanted to address a couple of things with Steve's point about what happened with the lawsuits. What probably happened. There's a lot of stuff that happens off screen in between 5 and Balboa,
like 15 years worth.
But if you look, it says on the Adrian's Restaurant, established 1995. So what probably happened was they didn't recover all of their money back, but they recovered enough money to have capital to start a business. Adrian, being smarter than Rocky, decided to run the restaurant. And like was really like the force of the household, and Rocky just sort of worked there and did what Adrian told him to do. And then when Adrian moved on, he just shifted the responsibilities over to himself, but he knew enough about the business to keep it going. That is what I believe happened. Because, established 1995, and then I think if you look at her grave, she died in like 2003 or something.
2002, I think.
2002.
Oh.
So there was a time where she was alive, and that was her restaurant. And she knew to market it as like, hey, check out pictures of my husband punching dudes. Everyone will show up because everybody loves Rocky.
I'm suspicious of the claim that Adrian would have named the restaurant after herself rather than naming it after Rocky.
That's a good point.
So maybe Rocky probably picked the name. It's like, it's your place, You're the one who knows all the good stuff. This isn't my place. This is your place.
I'm on the Wikipedia page for this movie, and the plot synopsis makes it seem much more epic than it really was. He also battles personal demons from his grief over Adrian's death.
I mean, he does. Dude, I cried twice during this movie while wearing Peter Criss makeup. And you know how annoying it is to cry wearing Kiss makeup?
Yeah, but like when it says battles demons, I expect something more along the lines of Doom.
So he's like, hey, yo, Satan, can you go toe-to-toe with me?
Yo, Satan.
I pray to Jesus before every match. I think I'm going to win this one.
Rip and tear, Satan. Yo, Doom guy.
Yo, Doom guy, you think you can go the distance? Hey, yo.
You're huge, that means you have huge guts. But do you have a huge heart?
So yeah, Rocky Balboa, I think it's a great film, but I've heard a lot of Rocky fans who aren't super into this one, and then a lot who love it and say it's like the number two.
Number two, man. I love this one. It just, what it was too? It just felt so good to have a nice closing chapter to the franchise that we love so much,
Yeah, I could see that.
And the fact that it delivered too, you're like, oh my God, I would have, if it was half this good, I would have still liked it. But the fact that it's as good as it was another thrilling thing too.
Yeah, when you looked at it as a closing chapter, the loss of Adrian and him dealing with grief is a great way to close it out and still have him come out with like some triumph over how to live his remaining years.
Yeah.
And as a nerd who followed this movie, the original title of this movie was Rocky VI: Puncher's Chance. And, as a guy who followed the making of the film, when they said Puncher's Chance in the movie, I got super excited. Like, oh, that was the original title. There it is. He said it. He said the thing.
Roll credits.
Yeah. Puncher's always got a chance. That was Duke. Duke had that line, right? The press conference?
That wasn't. They did have that, but then when they were announcing him coming into the ring, one of the commentators was saying, the last thing to go with a fighter is his punch. So Rocky's always going to have that puncher's chance.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm glad they switched the title there.
First thing to go is their brain.
Well, speaking of the number 2 film in the series, the number 2, according to our ranking, the original Rocky.
Yep.
I know.
Number 2.
Number 2.
Do you want to recheck? Do you want to recheck that? I think you're wrong there.
Nope. According to the math, by 1 point, Rocky 2 loses in a split decision.
By 1 point, losing a split decision.
But as you know, it's definitive. Like this got 19 points. The film that won the ranking got 20 points. So yes, internet, be angry with us. But right now, before you're angry with us, listen to us talk about how great the first Rocky is.
I'm insane with anger.
The internet's after us.
Yeah,
first Rocky movie is the greatest movie ever made in the history of movies. That's it. That's all we got to say, man. I can watch it every day if I have to.
This is probably definitively my fault. I ranked it towards the middle.
The middle.
So again.
See, dude, you've only watched it like how many times have you seen this movie? Once?
One. I've watched all of them once.
Yeah. See, we need to do this again on like your 19th viewing of that movie. And see what you think then.
So again,
like there's so many layers that are just gonna come through to you each succession of viewings since. So
again, having come to this as a non-fan, having watched all the movies for the first time within the last 2 weeks. I think this was a solid movie. It had a lot of really good moments and, was mostly fairly coherent. But I think there were other movies in the series. They got better at, their craft of creating films and telling stories and developing characters at various points in the franchise. And this is a really solid film, but not the best film in the series.
I think the trick with Rocky 1 is that it's kind of a different animal from the rest of the series, where this really is more like a slice of life drama with a big fight at the end. But
the boxing is secondary. It's a love story.
Yeah, it's a love story between Rocky and Adrian. It's a story about a guy who just wants the chance to prove himself, to prove that his life has like some sort of meaning. But as far as well-developed characters, this film does such a great job with Rocky as a character. Great job with Adrian as a character. Great job with Paulie as a foil to Rocky. Great job with Apollo as a character.
Yep.
Great job with Rocky's boss. I forget his name.
Gazzo as a character.
Gazzo's great.
Even like Tony Duke as a character. Like the few scenes that he's in, like you really get a feel where he's like the only one who recognizes Rocky as a threat. Mickey. Like
Mickey's brilliant.
Yeah, these characters have, layers and depth. Like, a brilliant score, obviously, by Bill Conti in this film.
You want to talk about the acting, too. Like, as far as performance and acting, this film is by far superior to the others. Like, Stallone doesn't act any better than this. Mickey doesn't act any better than this. Adrian.
Yeah, and like, there's so many great scenes in this that you kind of forget about in the context of the whole series, but, like, the Thanksgiving scene, Paulie throws the turkey into the alley, and when he gets violent and starts breaking stuff, like the foil of Paulie as a character to Rocky is just really, really brilliant in this film. And, to make a character like Rocky the protagonist, where like in another movie, he would be a guy like the hero character beats up. He's one of the random thugs. And, like low-level thug that would be beat up by Bruce Lee very quickly. But in this film, like, he doesn't... It's a guy who really, is kind of upset with the man he became and wishes he was something better than that. But, he still has heart. He has his turtles, Cuff and Link. He's just like this, sweetheart who just, loves this girl at the pet shop and wants to woo her.
Yeah. Tell her bad jokes.
Her bad jokes. The ice skating.
The jokes throughout the rest of the series. Rocky really lost his hunger for joke telling from 2 onward, really.
Yeah, he didn't get it. Well, actually, you talked over some of them in the other movies.
Oh, that's fair.
But I like the ice skating scene. Like that is
so fabulous.
If anything, that's probably when I think of Rocky 1, that's the scene I think of. It's not about the fights. It's
the love story.
It's the love stories, the
relationship
character moments. But also like some brilliant shots, like the opening scene where you see Jesus right away at that brawly match at the beginning with Spider Rico.
Yeah, it pans out and he's just getting his ass kicked.
Yep. But, also, I would say the final fight with Rocky versus Apollo in this movie, even though, like, choreography-wise, maybe not one of the stronger ones, because they got better as the films progressed.
Block with your face, Rocky.
But, like, the emotion of this fight is one of the most emotionally impactful fights in the series, easily.
Yeah, I'll tell you my favorite scene in this entire series is the 14th round, right? It's when Apollo gets the big knockout on Rocky. Rocky goes down, and Mickey's looking at him. He's going, stay down, right? And Apollo thinks he's won, so he turns back to the corner. He starts celebrating with Duke and everything. Meanwhile, in the back, you see Rocky like crawling up the ropes, trying to get to his feet, right? And Mickey's going, stay down. And Rocky finally gets to his feet. Apollo turns around. Rocky does the come on with his hands.
And Apollo's shaking his head, no.
Yeah, Apollo shakes his head and he goes like, oh. and he's just like, holy shit, like, what do I got to do to put this guy down, right? Oh, man. I just get shivers just like thinking about that scene. So amazing, you know?
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant movie, and, you know, all this, like, each character just feels, you know, alive and vibrant and fully realized. I think it's brilliant, and, you know, in some ways it feels very, like, mythic how big these characters are, but it succeeds on every level for me. I think this is just it's an all-time classic. You can see why this would get nominated for all the Academy Awards it did, because it deserved it. Best Picture, yeah. Best Picture.
You talk about that scene with Mickey and Rocky where Mickey comes back to decide to offer to train him, and, you know, Rocky's like, doesn't want to do it. So he goes into the bathroom, and then he starts yelling at him because you can't yell at him to his face, right?
Mm-hmm, because Rocky's too nice to do that.
Yeah. So he shuts the door, and then he starts yelling at him. And then there's a great part where Mickey leaves, right? And Rocky hears the door slam, but then Mickey, like, he's like, oh, I forgot my hat. So he goes back, and then Rocky comes out, and they make this awkward face, you know?
Yeah, the eye contact where he's I thought you were gone. And so he goes right back in the bathroom.
Yeah. And then Mickey just kind of does a little nod, just leaves, you know, and Rocky just keeps on yelling, pans out to the street, and you see Rocky run down, and in the distance you see them shake hands, and you're like, oh, just brilliant, you know.
And, you know, let's also give credit to this was the first training montage in the series, and it was brilliant. Like, this
set the standard. Steadicam work, right?
Yeah, I think the first film was Steadicam.
Yeah, up the steps.
So inventing new technology for this film, you know, it's brilliant. It knocks out of the park. So many iconic scenes, you know, punching the meat, drinking the raw eggs, steps. And that final battle, just, you know, just brilliant writing, brilliant performances, all heart, you know, and, like, this is such a great movie. Like, you know what, it was great when I was a kid, but even more brilliant now because, you know, when you're someone who's passionately pursuing your dreams, like, you reach a certain point where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to achieve that dream. And all you want is just a shot, one shot to prove yourself, one shot to prove that you're worth it, that, you know, you can do it. And a lot of people never get that shot. And so that desperation that he feels in this film, you know, I felt, and I think it's brilliant and one of the best films ever made.
Absolutely. So good.
Any other comments on Rocky 1 before we move on?
Incredible score. Did we mention the score? Bill Conti. Those songs I still listen to. If I go out for a run, you know, I put on the Rocky score. It's just such inspirational music still to this day. It's just a perfect, in the way, you know, the music was married with the film is just incredible.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, the emotional swells, especially during, like, you know, Mickey has a great character theme. You know, the quiet, you know, more somber moments when Rocky's walking the streets
solo piano stuff. Yep.
Yeah, but especially the fight with Apollo and, like, the building of the strings.
Yeah, can you imagine that fight without the song? Right? It's just
no, you can't. And that's like what, you know, especially, like, you know, the part where you're talking about your favorite scene in the movie when Rocky gets up and is like, "Come on." Like, the build up there is so great.
Yeah. Incredible. I love it.
Yeah, it's such a tender film. Like, even at the end of the movie, you know, Rocky, what is he shouting for? He's shouting for Adrian. And what happens when she gets, you know, to the ring? He's like, "Where's your hat?" Because he just cares so much about her. He just fought the heavyweight champion, and he's concerned, like, "Hey, where'd your hat go?" Because he's a guy that cares about his woman to, like, that degree.
And there's a line that kind of gets buried in that scene where all the reporters are in there snapping pictures, and they're all holding their mics in front of him, stuff like that. And that one part he goes, "Come on, get out of my face," or he says, come on, I've had enough things in my face all day here tonight," or so. So great. And then Paulie finally, you know, pulls the ring ropes up, and Adrian gets in there for him, and it ends with the two of them, right?
Yep. Just beautiful. It's a beautiful movie. It's less of it's not really a fight picture. It's really a love story.
Yeah, the whole movie is summed up in that scene that was, like, kind of the last scene they shot Sylvester wanted to add this scene in the movie, which he thought would make the whole movie, which before the fight where he goes down to the ring and he sees that they got his trunks wrong on the painting, right?
Right.
And the promoter's like, it really doesn't matter, does it? It's just going to be a show. And then Rocky kind of realizes what it's all about. And he goes back and he has that scene sitting on his bed saying, like, he can't beat him. Like, the odds are too great, but he just wants to go to distance. And that kind of sums up the entire film, right?
Yes, and that was such a brilliant addition. And yes, the movie needed that. That summed up the movie so well.
Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant scene. So before we get to the number one film on the list, let's go through the ranking in order. From least best to best. Creed, Rocky 3, Rocky 2, Rocky 5, Creed 2, Rocky Balboa, Rocky. But the best film in the Rocky series, according to this panel, Rocky 4. That's right, folks.
I guess. I guess. If you say so.
According to the votes, which were not rigged, Rocky 4 legitimately won with 20 points over the 19 points that the original Rocky got.
This basically comes from Greg and I both gave it 8.
Yeah, Steve and I both put it at the very top.
Rocky 4 is about did I put in 4th or 5th? I think 5th.
Yeah.
That would be my 5th of the 8 that I like. But, I know why it's appealing. It's definitely a great movie. Like, it hits on all things. Like, it's flashy to watch. It's funny. It's so 1985. It's so comic book. And it's, the training sequences are fabulous. It's 90 minutes. It's not like a long movie. It's a fun movie.
And 1/3 of it is montage.
Yeah, exactly. There's about 4 or 5 great montages in it.
So the thing about Rocky 4 is I came to this realization actually just a couple days ago where Rocky 4 is legitimately a great movie. Like, a lot of my appreciation came from it from an ironic level. But like the thing is, this movie is so watchable where I can watch it any time of the day and just, on any random day and can sit and watch the entire thing front to back and not get bored with it.
Yeah. It's such a different tone than the original Rocky when you think of it, though, right? It's opposite film.
It's completely different. But the thing is, it's a film that can suck you in and you can watch it over and over and over and over again and still be completely satisfied with it is something remarkable. There are, a lot of fun gets, made fun of this. This movie gets made fun of a lot, but there's so many great things to discuss in it.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, 1/3 of the movie is montage. Those are perhaps the best montages in the history of cinema.
They are very good montages.
Like, the training montages showing the difference of Rocky's training versus Drago's training. Yeah, those are great. Like, both montage songs are great, and Gonna Fly Now would not work with this movie because the tone is so different. And you really needed, like, the more dramatic version of that first montage, and you really needed that super optimistic Hearts on Fire second part.
Yeah. Not only do you have montages, but you have like pretty much full blown music videos too, right? Like there's that No Easy Way Out segment where Rocky's frustrated after Apollo's died and he needs to clear his head, so he just drives around in his car and it's just flashbacks, right? The first 3 films. Yeah. And then also you got the Living in America James Brown, Apollo's entrance there, which is pretty much a music video too, right?
Yeah, but also James Brown is freaking amazing, so that scene is awesome. The No Easy Way Out scene is also awesome because it's Rocky driving around at night trying to clear his head, and it's a great song. The montage during the Rocky Drago fight where the song, I think it's called War, is playing.
Yeah. Vince DiCola did the score for this one.
Right, and it's very different. It's very like synth heavy and guitar driven, and sort of the comparison I would make is between Japanese Dragon Ball and American Dragon Ball. Where Japanese Dragon Ball is sort of like the Bill Conti score, like orchestral heavy, focusing on strings. And then, like...
American Dragon Ball's a bunch of Disturbed songs.
No, but also, like, the actual show is, like, ambient keyboard rock. And that's kind of what you get with Rocky IV. And that's really awesome.
I like it. You got to get you can get the full score version by Vince DiCola, different than the Rocky IV soundtrack, where you get, like, all the extra stuff, like Drago's Suite and stuff like that. And you get the, like, Polly's Robot song and all that stuff, which is kind of neat.
Oh, yeah, no, and Polly's Robot, I mean, a fun part of the movie.
Polly's Sexbot.
Yeah, Polly's Sexbot.
I love when he changes the voice to be that sexy voice, right?
Yeah,
and then she's nagging him as he's packing his car, like, don't forget your thing. And he's like, stop busting my chops.
Oh, Polly, he's so terrible.
But yeah, this film contains the most epic fight in the series, by far. Like, it doesn't get much more epic than avenging your friend's death and punching out communism.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were talking about Rocky being the reluctant hero, where he didn't really have an interest in, you know, this political battle. Like, it was Apollo who's like, it's us versus them, man. Like, why don't you get it? And Apollo, though he dies in this movie, is such a strong presence in that beginning. And, like, his character, like, is, you know, fleshed out and developed super well. And, you know, that makes his death all that much more tragic.
Seems so crazy, though, why he wanted to fight so bad, and then, like, why he wouldn't give up. Like, how could he not realize how unprepared he was, like, after that first round?
But I think it's, you know, consistent with his character. He has that ego.
Nobody ever taps out.
Yeah, but, like, would you really want to die at an exhibition fight like that? I don't know. In the second round?
I wouldn't want to die in any fight.
But, you know, his speech about, like, you know, the warrior might as well be dead if he has nothing left to fight for.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
It totally works with Apollo's character. And the thing is, like, that fight with Apollo versus Drago is one of the great fights of the series. But I would say the best fight of the series, yes, is Rocky versus Drago. It's the final battle. It's the epic conclusion of this series. Like, it is, like, everything else is just fallout from this one fight. And both of them ruin each other's lives over this fight. And it is a brutal, it's a brutal war.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that Rocky is able to, like, handle this roided up dude and still, like, ultimately defeat him. So in Creed 2, when Drago says he beat me, like, you can tell that hurts because he knows he decisively lost. Rocky decisively beat him. And there's not the excuse of Rocky not being a good fighter like in some of the other films. Like, he legitimately had to become the best fighter that world has ever known in order to take on Drago. And Steve, you were telling me, and I'll let you talk about why you think Drago is actually a well-written character, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, Drago is an amazing character, largely because Dolph Lundgren is a really good actor. So throughout the first, half, 2/3 of the movie, Drago doesn't have pretty much any dialogue. So all of the and the character barely moves when he isn't boxing. So the entire role of the character is just Dolph Lundgren acting with his face and with his body. So he gets the Apollo fight. He does a really great job of this, where he's this kid from the Soviet Union that only knows what he's been taught, and that is boxing, and he's a pawn in this massive geopolitical game, and he's just dumped into the middle of this American spectacle where there's a bunch of bright lights and people are booing his name for nothing that he's ever done, and this glitzy music performance happens, and it's just giant propaganda thing for the American state. And he's just standing there, and you can read all of the shock and the how out of place he feels on his face and the stiffness of his body language. And he just does such a really great job of this. I really like Ivan Drago. He is a great character.
Yeah, for a character who often gets criticized as being, one note, two-dimensional, no depth, I would very much agree with Steve that he was a brilliant character. The writing was brilliant. The performance was brilliant, even without Creed 2. But then with Creed 2, in addition to it,
right,
like Drago is
wrapping it up.
Absolutely a brilliant, brilliant character and one of the best characters in the series.
There's been a lot of ink spilled, or I don't know how much ink spilled total, but I've read a fair amount about this. That they talk about, his major line is "I must break you" right before they fight, and how that's not just his character talking smack. That is his character saying literally, "I must destroy you, otherwise my life is ruined." Which you see the fallout of that in Creed 2, where he failed to break Rocky, and that broke him instead.
But in a way, he still did break Rocky. Like the thing is, that fight destroyed both of them, and that's kind of why the Rocky series I think is brilliant as a whole. Because
do I need the anus is bleeding drop again?
I don't think you do. But the fact that a fight that takes that much out of you and still has consequences, I think is great. You can't just do what these guys do without consequence. And the fact that, in Creed 2 we're saying, Drago broke things in me that, were never healed. It's absolutely brilliant. And, yes, the movie is, sort of silly and music video-esque, but that's probably why it's so watchable. This is, both fun, but also legitimately dramatic, where you are so rooting for Rocky to win. And there is just sincere investment every time I watch it. And no matter how many times I watch Rocky 4, it never gets old.
It's a fun movie. It's a Christmas movie too, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Tried to convince my wife to listen to the soundtrack because I said it's Christmas music, and it did not work. Absolutely.
Yeah, there was for about 4 or 5 years straight, a bunch of fellows and I, every Christmas Eve, we would always watch the Balboa Drago fight for Christmas Eve,
4 and 5.
Great stuff.
Christmas movies in the series.
Well, they're all the first one's Thanksgiving, right? When does Rocky 2? Rocky 2 is not Christmas.
No, they do celebrate Christmas in Rocky 1. Rocky 2 is not Christmas.
Yeah.
Rocky 3, there's a Christmas scene. Christmas. There's a scene in the montage at the beginning of Eye of the Tiger where they're opening Christmas presents and Mickey is dressed as Santa. Yeah. So
Rocky 5 is Christmas and Rocky 5, right?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. There's the evil promoter brings by gifts to rub everyone's face in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definite Christmas theme to the Rocky movies, right?
Well, yeah, that's why they always come out around Thanksgiving. They're associated with the Thanksgiving Christmas season.
Yeah. And we talk about the training montages, and this one is just fabulous too, right? Rocky goes to some desolate place in Russia where he can just train out in the snow and in this barn, and he's got all these weird unorthodox ways of training. There's that one scene where he's doing those leg lifts and he's just holding behind his neck, and his whole he's just up on his shoulders and he's doing leg lifts, insane, and he's doing sit-ups off these balconies or whatever,
yep.
The barn and stuff like that. And he's lifting and he's picking up the wagon with all the characters in it, and
right, and freaking climbs a mountain.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, where he's climbing the mountain, and so great. And he gets to the top of the mountain and he yells "Drago!" Right, and it's it's a helicopter shot, of the him on the mountain with his arms outstretched. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, legitimately, I can't think of better film montages than the ones in Rocky 4, and that is a legitimate art to succeed in doing that. People might make fun Rocky movies, all they do is montages. A good montage is a form of art, and this movie succeeds so well. But I'm invested in the characters, the action, the plot. It's yes, it's silly, Rocky ending the Cold War and we made the jokes, but you know what?
Yeah.
I was making those jokes before the internet started making them, and then the internet caught up with me. I'm like, yes, thank you, internet. I feel like we're on the same page here. This is great.
I remember seeing this movie in the theater when it came out in 1985, and I remember leaving the theater with my dad feeling all nice and warm and cozy inside because the way it ended on that happy note, we can all get along.
Yeah, just absolutely brilliant film. And I, selfishly, since I voted at number 1, I'm really glad it won our ranking.
Yeah, you're wrong, but I like it.
You're wrong, but we'll let it slide.
Look,
Yeah, it's your show. It's your show.
According to math, and your votes were part of this. If you had ranked it lower, if you had ranked it 1 point lower, yeah, it would have. Rocky 1 would have taken the title, because with the tie, if they were tied, that lower vote would have made Rocky 1 win. But because of the way it is, Rocky 4 is definitively, by far, the best film in the Rocky franchise.
Honestly, I think I would have preferred that ranking, because that would have given 3 a much higher rank.
Well, Steve, I want you to watch.
I'm sorry, Creed, not 3.
Steve, I want you to watch the original Rocky like 9 more times and then get back to me on where it stands.
Ooh, it's a quest.
So here comes the part of the show where we ask the panelists if they were happy with the ranking or surprised by it. Yes, with both for me. I was surprised, but I understand. Steve hasn't seen them as often as I have, and Greg, you saw them like kind of after they were out originally, right? So we're looking at these films from 3 different ways, For the most part, yeah. Yeah. And so I would say the biggest thing that made me happy was seeing that 5 not ranking at the bottom. Just because I'm so, I think it's a good film, and I'm so tired of that being at the bottom of everyone's list. Where even though I can see it being a legitimate place to put it, I'm glad that it wasn't ranked at the bottom of this list, personally. So that was the big surprise and thing I was happy with, and obviously I didn't think that 4 was necessarily going to defeat Rocky 1, but hey, it did, because it's better.
It's
by
Rocky.
far.
It's always about the underdog.
That's right.
The underdog always has a chance.
And the underdog.
See, Rocky 1 is the underdog, though. Rocky 4 is the big Hollywood blockbuster. We have $1 million budget film.
But
Rocky's the underdog.
No, because Rocky 1 is the critic darling of the series, where a lot of people write off the rest of the series except the first one. So really, Rocky 4...
That's just wrong entirely, but...
Yes, it is wrong. But Rocky 4, being one of the more critically derided ones, was definitely the underdog. Even though I think, it's the highest grossing sports film of all time or something like that.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was huge, yeah.
Biggest film in the series. But yeah, I'm happy it won. So Steve, how do you feel about the Rocky films overall? Would you say you're a Rocky fan at this point?
Sure. Yeah, I enjoyed them. It was a good experience. I don't tend to call myself a movie fan all that often, just because I don't rewatch movies very much. So watching these things 9 times will take a while.
But we've done a lot of Kiss episodes, and I would say you probably don't consider yourself a Kiss fan.
Not particularly, no.
But would you say you're a Rocky fan?
I think overall the Rocky series is much stronger than the Kiss discography.
That's fair. I will absolutely give you that.
I'll agree with you there.
Oh wow! So Rocky 4 was the highest-grossing sports film until The Blind Side.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Feel kind of blindsided by that one.
Yeah, rough.
All right, well, that's a depressing note to end on.
38%
Plugs.
approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
So, Lee, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can check out my podcast at the website, trampslikeUspod.com. Bruce Springsteen podcast, and we have a side cast called Rockin' and Rollin' and Whatnot, where I just talk about, rockin' and rollin' and whatnot. All right, thank you very much.
Hey, yo, Steve, where can people find us on the internet?
They can find us at lipstickgeneration.com and on several social media platforms and whatnot. Also under the name Lipstick Generation, unless there are character limits on the length of your username, in which case it's Mr. Cool Rock and Roll.
Where's the applause? And remember, kids, if I can change, and you can change, everybody can change!
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But condominiums, I never use them. All right, that's our show. Bye.